Kevin, teach us.
Okay. Just one idea from Parashat Tzav, which is the second portion, the second Torah reading of Parashat Vayikra, which starts this week, which is this week. Um, just get my notes here. So one of the things that is stressed is the power of sacrifice and giving. And giving, uh, first of all, if people give charity, tzedakah, time, or energy, it's it reminds us of the sacrifices. You're sacrificing something. The actual sacrifices were animals, meal offerings, etc. So people sacrificing their time, giving their time, and it makes us into better people, and considers and to also always think of others that are less fortunate than ourselves, or might need assistance. So we should always, if we can, if we have an opportunity, try to give of ourselves, either through tzedakah or our time, or as it says, our energy. And obviously, it always makes the world a better place.
Okay, good. It's true. All right. I'm just going to share with somebody. I'm just going to share something a second. Okay. Just hang on a second. Sorry, guys. Give me a sec. Okay. So, Lance, the only thing that you missed out on in the bottom line is that as far as the Sadducean position is, which they didn't agree with the rabbis, they didn't uh, uphold the oral Torah, and the written Torah definition was quite literal. So even they, in order to sell the idea to the rabbis, had to have a kol v'chomer, not just based on logic, but also based on a pasuk to enforce that logic. So that's compared to an il fortiori argument, which is logic alone. So the Sadducean position is unless the defendant is killed because of the testimony of the false witnesses, then we do not then punish the false witnesses with the reciprocal death penalty. As far as the rabbis are concerned, and firstly, where do the Sadduceans get it? They see this from Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 21, which is a life in place of a life, meaning only if a life is taken and the Hazamah process of conspiring testimony was successful, um, and which a life has actually been taken, does reciprocal punishment apply? The rabbi said to them, well, there's a problem. Because if you look in Devarim, chapter 19, verse 19, here it says in the Mishnah, in Schottenstein, chapter 19, verse 21, but it's actually 19, verse 19, and you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother. And what's implicit is that if you're planning to rob somebody with no money, you're not going to be successful because they're broke. If you're going to plan to kill somebody that's already dead, you're not going to be successful because that person's dead. So that very implication is, and you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother, meaning it's the time when the brother is still alive, his fellow Jew. So it's a small window period. That's when a verdict has been delivered but has not yet been carried out. So in that particular case, it is given because you can apply the verse, and you shall do to the Adam Zomimim as they plan to do to his brother. And also, it fulfills the actual pasuk in Devarim, a life in the place for a life, because from a legal standpoint, the minute the verdict is drawn up against the defendant, he's legally dead. They just haven't carried it out yet. So it has to fulfill both those criteria. And why do you need that verse? a life in place of a life, the rabbis. Why do they say that? It's because you might have thought at any time, as long as you're plotting, as long as they plotted to falsely testify against their brother, you can apply the reciprocal death penalty for the mere plotting alone. But that is not the case. It's only when a verdict is drafted against the defendant. So it has to be within that small window period in order to fulfill the rabbinical edict of both Devarim chapter 21, chapter 19, verse 21 and 19, verse 19 as a reciprocal punishment. Do you see why there's that window period? Does everybody see it? It's very straightforward. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, now that we can do that, we can finally go on. And what we're dealing with is this case. It says the Brisa teaches Baribi. Now, what is Baribi? It's a name basically saying of a leader, of somebody of preeminence of that generation. So there was one of the sages that was known as Baribi. So a Brisa teaches, Baribi says, if the witnesses who testified falsely have not yet killed their victim with their false testimony, they are executed when they are proven to be zomimim in fulfillment of the hazama penalty once the verdict has been drafted against the defendant. And if in that period a second set of witnesses come and say, hey, to the judges, the first set were with us somewhere else at the time where they claimed to have seen the defendant kill this person, at that particular point, we can apply it. But as soon as the defendant has been killed, if the second set come afterwards and said, listen, we heard somebody was killed, it's impossible. They were with us in a different location at the time the accused was testified against. They're not executed at that point for their false testimony. So in other words, Baribi concisely summarizes the Mishnah's ruling and adds, once the court has carried out the sentence, the Zomimim are no longer liable to punishment. And how do they interpret this, guys? He shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, meaning you can only intend to do something while the victim is alive. At the point where a second set come after the victim is not alive anymore, it's no longer applicable for the reciprocal penalty. So this is questioned by his own father. His father said to Baribi, listen, my son, is it not a kol v'chomer? What does it mean? It means like, although the verse which teaches the punishment of zomimim witnesses clearly refers to an instance in which the accused gas was not yet executed, it can be demonstrated by means of a kol v'chomer argument, by a logical construct, that they should certainly be punished if their plot was successful and he's executed. In other words, all the father is saying to his son, Baribi, is if in an attempt of the conspiring witnesses to get somebody killed, if that plotting alone, when they were was able to get the conspiring witnesses executed, then surely once the defendant has been executed, even more so, you should be able to apply the penalty against the conspiring witnesses. Makes sense, right, guys? Logically, you got to admit it does make sense. Does that make sense to all of you?
Yeah.
Okay, on the basis of, quite simply, if you want to apply such a hectic punishment and nothing's yet happened to the defendant technically, even though a verdict was against him, even more so when something does happen to him, why not apply the reciprocal death penalty? Because they've actually caused his death. That's what the father said to Baribi, and he wasn't a Sadducean at all. And Baribi said to his father, look, you, our teacher, actually taught us a principle when I was younger, that we cannot assign punishments on the basis of logical inferences, such as a kol v'chomer. Now, what does it mean? So there's a general principle of Torah law that corporeal punishments, what's in the realm of corporeal punishments generally? It's punishments that might have an implication in this world, but have a ramification in the spiritual world. Let me just give you an example. There's a Gemara called Chrysos. Now, it's nothing to do with Christianity. It's actually the punishments of kares. So kares comes with lashes. So in this world, we get lashes. I'm not saying for breaking a normal negative commandment, but generally, kares means that a Jew is cut off from his people in the spiritual world, and his life is shortened in this world, not necessarily by death penalty, but through divine intervention, and he gets Makkos in this world. There are ways to atone in this world so that kares can be avoided, but not in all cases. So that's considered a corporeal punishment, meaning it has a spiritual knock-on effect. The same thing for death penalty cases, is that sometimes only death atones for it, providing there's a proper kapora and atonement process. But even then, it's going to have a spiritual implication on the soul. So anything that has a corporeal punishment element to it can only be imposed in situations where the Torah, number one, clearly decrees them. Either it's got to be explicit or in a scriptural allusion, meaning it's either got to be stated mafurish in the Chumash, or there has to be a scriptural allusion, meaning like a Gezerah Shava, a Hekesh, etc. There are 13 humanetic principles, which means principles at which you can extrapolate from Moshe at Har Sinai. But logical arguments alone, if they don't have any clear Torah sourcing and a Tanaic tradition, no matter how compelling, are not valid to extend a punishment to another situation. Because the logical argument is, if in an attempt to have false testimony get somebody the death penalty, and they were given the reciprocal death penalty even though the victim wasn't killed. In a case where the victim is killed, and then only afterwards they were found to be conspiring, even more so they should be killed. And the Gemara is saying, no, Baribi is saying to his father, no, you can't assign punishment on the basis of logical inferences. And therefore, since our verse specifies a case in which the witnesses merely planned, and this is the key term, guys, planned to injure their victim, we can't extend the punishment by the logic of a kol v'chomer to the case in which the plan did actually succeed and the accused was executed. And I'm just going to explain to you why that is. Okay, and this is very important if we learn nothing else from the shir, because Lance has to lock up by 6. The guilt of a conspiring witnesses for a verdict, which has in fact been successfully implemented and the defendant has been executed, is no longer viewed as merely additional to the guilt that they had by already incurring on their neshamas for planning. Why? Because if it's merely additional to that guilt, you could still be punished for planning even after the verdict had been carrying out. But what the Gemara is actually saying is, once the accused has been executed, their crime now has been transformed, if you will, from like a simple one of merely corrupting the justice system, not wasting the court's time. You've got to be careful there, because the court is prepared to use a lot of time to save somebody, but it's to corrupt the justice system and have an innocent person killed. So it's a very different crime spiritually to plan to kill somebody to the greater one of actually causing his death. And it's transformed. It's not an added factor that the victim was just killed. It's now completely different spiritual implication, because it's almost like actually killing as opposed to a planning process. So the Zomamim, conspiring witnesses, can no longer be punished for the crime of planning his death, which in itself is very extreme. Why? Because they were merely planning to kill him. And by merely planning to kill him, they get given the reciprocal death penalty for merely planning to kill an innocent person and corrupting the justice system. But now, if they're going to be punished spiritually for the greater crime of actually causing the death, then this lesser crime of planning, you can't infer from a logical deduction. And even the Ramban, Nachmanides, offers a rationale, a logic for the Torah's decree that Zomamim witnesses are not punished by human courts once the verdict has been executed, quite literally and figuratively in this case. So this is a point that Gavin had an issue, but he's coming more to terms with. Is Gavin specifically to address your issue? There's a metaphysical principle at work here. Because if you look at the pasuk, like 2 verses earlier, it uses this term lifnei Hashem, which means before God. So it demonstrates a principle that Hashem, so to speak, is present in the courtroom to participate in the judicial process of righteous judges and to guard it. I think to a certain extent today with the Beis Din, but certainly at the time of the Sanhedrin, when they were at a very, very high spiritual level of prophecy. And they certainly had 23 judges, and they were holding at a level of righteousness that we cannot even comprehend. Hashem was definitely involved in guiding that process. So, the rule that the second set of witnesses is believed to establish that the first set could not have seen what they claim to have seen, and thereby discredit them, is actually a scriptural decree. Because there's no inherent reason, guys, to give more credence to the latter witnesses' testimony than to give credence to the formers. They should, by all logical inferences, cancel each other out. And that, in fact, does happen with contradicting witnesses. Is you've got two sets of witnesses. It doesn't matter if there's a later set or an earlier set. If they're contradicting each other, the case is thrown out of court. But here they're calling into question the integrity of the first set of witnesses by saying you were with us in a different location somewhere else. So the underlying premise here is that Hashem is guiding the process, and his guiding hand guarantees the integrity of the judicial process. And it ensures that the hazama occurs only when the first witnesses are culpable. In other words, where the verdict has already been carried out and the accused has been put to death, that principle has the opposite effect. In other words, in a spiritual realm, if he was guiltless, Hashem's divine providence would have intervened at the right time and at any time up until that court process, have it thrown out of court. Because even if the first set of witnesses are not given the reciprocal penalty because the defendant hasn't been had a verdict drawn against him, if there's a second set that said the first set weren't there to witness the crime and were with them somewhere else, the case would have been thrown out of court. So divine guidance would have made that second set appear any time in order that the defendant not be killed. So the defendant is killed because either in this transmigration or in another transmigration, that person is worthy of the death sentence, and therefore it's carried out in a legal format in the Sanhedrin, so which is divinely ordained. But that doesn't take away culpability of the Adam Zomimim. And in fact, where their death sentence for corrupting the ends of justice and having an innocent person killed, so they were able to stop it the second set before the sentence was carried out, then them having to die for plotting, merely planning and plotting, would have been, if they used that opportunity to take responsibility, would have atoned for their sin, where it would have been much better for them in the next world. Now they've got no sort of mercy shown in the next world because they've got no way to atone in this world. So it's worked out exactly as far as capital punishment is concerned. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is that monetary cases are an exception to the rule. Guys, would you like to take a guess as to why?
I
Yes.
guess.
Yeah.
Because then you can, if you pay back a fifth as a penalty, it's that's more
Hello?
lenient in a way. Huh?
Yeah,
I think it's more, it's like a more lenient, more
yeah,
flexible, should we
yeah,
say.
yeah. So there is a flexibility, but why is there flexibility, Kev? Why do you think?
Let me think about it for a sec.
Paid back.
It's so they can feel that like if they pay back the capital, the amount, then it's they know that they've redeemed themselves, and it's and
Yeah,
they get a chance. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So what Kevin is saying is correct, is that it's not so bad. Listen, it's nothing great. It's nothing great, but they only sought to cost this person money. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva sees it as a kanas, a penalty, guys, meaning the rabbis see it as compensation because they base it on verdict. So because the defendant lost money in the verdict, then he is compensated, even if the verdict wasn't carried out, because there was a legal decree that he must pay. So they say a verdict is measure for measure, and therefore it's compensation. Rabbi Akiva says a bit like Kevin in that, or maybe Kevin says a bit like Rabbi Akiva, that it's actually a kanas, it's a penalty. Meaning, at the stage, even before the defendant, say the second set of witnesses come before the defendant has paid the money out and said, listen, this wasn't the case. The money is still awarded to the defendant as a penalty against the Eidim Zomimim, even though that person hasn't lost money, because it's teaching them a lesson and allowing them to pay a kapora. But one of the reasons why there's more mercy shown is because it is. You're looking to cost a person money or get lashes, but you're not looking to have a person killed. So it's enough that you pay for something that you haven't necessarily cost the individual, which is why even before the individual is made, the defendant is made to pay, the Eidim Zomimim would pay the defendant even if he hadn't actually lost money. However, they're not irreversible, Lance, and this is the point. Lance mentioned this ages ago. He asked about a Cohen, but what happens? Can a Cohen not have his status reinstalled? Reinstalled. I'm thinking of a computer term.
Reinstated.
Reinstated. Software is reinstalled, but reinstated. So Lance was quite correct in that you can. If a Cohen is stripped of his status because somebody accuses his father of marrying a divorcee, after the verdict has been given and he's stripped of his Cohen status, Lance, they can reverse it because it's reversible. When you lop somebody's head off, little bit difficult to reverse that. Little bit difficult. So in this case, monetary compensation, which the defendant has to give to the other party, is refunded back to him. It's refunded back to him. And who pays it at the end of the day? Well, he gets the money back, but the Eidim Zomimim still have to pay that money to him. So not only does he get it back, but the Eidim Zomimim have to pay. So in other words, it's a kapora for them. But it is also a penalty because it's rectified financially on that basis. Now, why? Because monetary cases are an exception to the rule because their decisions are reversed once the witness or the witnesses have been proven to be conspiring. So since it's now revealed that there was no basis for the judges to award money, as they did, the party benefited from the false testimony must return or pay it. So the Zimmerman witnesses do not succeed and the actions can still be classified as a plan rather than actual damage. And as far as I know, even the awarded party pays it back to the defendant that paid them, but they're still subject to the Hazamah penalty. They're still subject to it. That's according to Tosfot to Bava Kama and 4b. We learned that. Now, furthermore, punishments can't be obviously assigned on the basis of logical inferences, and that's according to corporeal punishments, not monetary awards. Okay? So not everybody agrees. In other words, what happens in a case of there's an accusation of kares and there's lashes, etc. According to many opinions, is that we do apply the kol v'chomer in certain cases and we don't in another. But if you look at the Rambam, Maimonides, And he says that principle is limited solely to death penalties. It doesn't even apply to a case of Makkos lashes. And Zimmerman witnesses are punished with lashes even if the court already carried out the sentence of Makkos against their victim. Because although it's not reversible and the defendant got lashed, there's no reason that you can't then lash the Adam Zimmerman because they're entitled to get a penalty. Will that atone for them fully? Well, I'm not sure because if the defendant got lashed innocently, it might not fully atone, number one. And number two, in the spiritual terms, obviously he was meant to get lashed and it was carried out in this world. But the reciprocal lashes given to the Adam Zomimim for testifying against their victim is some sort of a kapora. Does that make sense, guys? It's only in capital cases that there's that window period. Is there any questions?
Yeah. So I wanted to, sorry, I'm just a bit dazed. So just to make sure, I want to clarify something.
Sure.
Because I don't know if I heard everything 100%. So it makes no difference when the in a monetary case, it makes no difference when the witnesses come. Makes no difference the timing. If it's before, during, after, it's all the same result.
No, I think there is a difference. I'll tell you what I think it is from what
Stuff gets refunded and stuff otherwise, but I mean, it doesn't really make much difference to the outcome. Everyone's still going to get the same thing in the end.
No. This is what I think, Gav. I stand to be corrected, but I'm pretty sure. So let's just say you've got two conspiring witnesses, and you've got a plaintiff and a defendant. Okay. Then what actually happens there is the defendant has to pay the money to the plaintiff, and then it's proven that a second set of witnesses said that the first set were with them somewhere else, so that the defendant couldn't have damaged the plaintiff, and the plaintiff then has to refund the money back to the defendant. But at that point, we don't leave the Adam Zimmerman alone because we don't know what their relationship was to the plaintiff. They could have got a kickback. We don't know. But as far as we know, only the plaintiff has refunded the defendant, but we can apply the reciprocal penalty to the Adam Zomimim also. So what ends up happening then is the defendant actually makes a profit. He doesn't just get his money back. So it does have an implication, it seems.
No, but wouldn't that be the same whether they came before the judgment? Whether it was what if it's chucked? Is it ever chucked out then if they come before the judgment?
So if it hasn't been, if a verdict hasn't been cast by the judges against the defendant, it's chucked out at that stage, and the Adam Zomimim don't get the reciprocal penalty.
Yeah, so it does make a difference then. That's
It
what I was
does
trying to
make
get
a difference, yeah.
It does make a difference.
So what happens then is the defendant actually gains because the plaintiff is paying back the defendant based on the false claim, so he's getting his money back, and the defendant is actually getting money from the Adam Zomimim. Where it works out lousy is for lashes, because the defendant still gets lashed, but the Adam Zomimim also get lashed. What were you going to ask, Lance?
I was asking about the lashes. So was the defendant lashed as well?
Unfortunately, we're saying in a case, we're trying to avoid that. So if in a case where the second set of witnesses only come in time after they hear the defendant was lashed, the defendant's already been lashed, but retroactively, according to the Rambam, is that the Adam Zomimim are still lashed. According to other opinions, not the Rambam, is that in fact that's not the case. In other words, because there is a corporeal element to it, in a case where it's not monetary, it's not every opinion agrees. Do you get what I'm saying? Not every opinion agrees.
If they cause someone to get lashed, they should definitely get lashed. It's like just I didn't know work existed I didn't know work existed back then.
So according to most opinions, and Rambam is the halacha, is that yes, you can't, you don't do it in the case of the death penalty. Even this is the arguments with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the rabbis, is the rabbis say that there's a window period, and the other opinions say that the kol v'chomer, the only exception, is in cases of death penalty. But in monetary cases and lashes, they do get the reciprocal penalty. It's even in halacha according to the Rambam. Except the only problem is it ends up in tears a little bit for the defendant with lashes, because in a case of money, it's just reversed back to him, and he gets the Edom Zomamim money, which means he actually wins if the verdict is carried out to a certain extent. Even if it's not carried out, he still gets the money from the Edom Zomamim. It just the money isn't reversed. So in other words, in monetary cases, the defendant actually wins. In capital cases, obviously, it could be very, very dicey. As far as the case of Makkos is concerned, lashes, it's applied to the Edom Zomamim, both in a case of between verdict and sentencing, and that is the best time, Lance, because the defendant doesn't get lashed, but the Edom Zomamim does. But if the lashes are already applied to the defendant, we still do lash the Edom Zomamim. It's the same as in monetary cases. Is that crystal clear? So there's a window period only where we don't apply the reciprocal death penalty for capital cases after the sentence has been carried out. But as far as lashes are concerned on monetary compensation, the Edom Zomamim, even once it's carried out, the plaintiff refunds the defendant, and the Edom Zomamim pay the penalty of what they sought to incur of costing for the defendant. So the defendant gains in terms of lashes. Even after the defendant has been lashed for false testimony against him that he broke a negative commandment, the Edom Zomamim are still lashed as a reciprocal penalty. Does that make sense, guys? Very straightforward. All right, there's nothing further to discuss on this issue. We're going to end early. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss a very, very simple case. And that
Damon, I've got that. I'm far away tomorrow. I won't be able to make it.
All right. So
Wednesday. Oh no, we said 7 o'clock or something, eh?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can, but Lance is going out of Johannesburg tomorrow.
Yeah, and I've actually got a meeting at 6:30, so I'd have to make it 7:30.
All right, so let's cancel for tomorrow. Let's do it on
Dan, I'm also out of Johannesburg tomorrow.
All right, Wednesday.
Yeah. And Damon also.
You're going to give that
an hour ahead, eh, Damon? It's an hour ahead here now. The clocks will turn forward on Friday. So,
Yeah,
you must tell us how this affects you.
So, all right, let's get together Wednesday. Lance has to lock up, but we will work on a time with the new Israel time that works for everybody.
Yeah,
Wednesday we will. Does it work for you guys at 5:20 or 5:15 on Wednesday?
Let me check.
Damon, I can do it tomorrow, not a Wednesday.
And Gavin can't. All right, so Thursday we do it then.
I can at 7:30. I've got a meeting from 6:30 till about 7:30.
Me too. I can make it anytime tomorrow. I just can't make it on Wednesday.
Okay. So tomorrow, do we do it at 7:30? No, listen, guys, let's...
yeah, that's fine. I'm available.
Yeah, me too.
I'm available.
But it's an hour ahead of Israel. You sure you guys are available, both of you?
Yeah. I just checked my calendar.
Okay, so let's talk on WhatsApp tomorrow night.
We'll talk on WhatsApp. We'll work it out. All right.
We'll try to work it out tomorrow. Thanks, guys.